job, buddy. Thank you, everybody. If you are capable of standing, we will stand and sing the Shema. Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Baruch Shem Kevod, Malkuto, Leolam Vayed. Yeshua HaMashiach Hu Adonai. Hear, O Israel, Yah is our Elohim, Yah is one. Blessed be his glorious name, whose kingdom is forever and ever. the Messiah Yeshua. He is Lord. Amen. All right, folks, if you have your Bibles, you can get them ready, and I'll tell you what we're going to be doing. Yeah. We are going to be doing a special presentation this evening. I am going to interrupt our study of the book of Zechariah briefly because I want to discuss the Passover. Many times throughout the years, I have wanted to. I always get busy doing stuff and getting into our study and everything, and I always find myself like meeting on the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread talking about Passover stuff. And I'm like, it just would make a little bit more sense perhaps if I were to talk about some Passover stuff as you're leading up to it. Because I know that, there are some people either in the audience online or even in-house who are just not that familiar. And it's kind of, they're starting to get their feet wet. They're kind of figuring out what to do. And also, I don't know if you have noticed this, but I know I have for myself. And that is that even though I've been doing this now for like 13 years, it seems like every year when there's a festival time rolling around, I got to flip open my Bible and just refresh myself continuously regarding, okay, what exactly is going on here? What am I supposed to, I have a general sense like most of you probably. But I just continuously find myself thinking, I really do need to open up my Bible and just refresh myself about these feast days that come around all the time. And so it made sense to me to do a general refresher, frankly, just brushing up. So I want to tackle this from two perspectives. One is to hit it from the idea of what is the real practical boots on the ground, where the rubber meets the road kind of stuff. And I know that this is a lot of it very much open to interpretation, and I'm not going to sit up here and tell you, here's the right way to do it. I'm not even going to tell you necessarily, here's how we do it. We're going to discuss it. This evening is going to kind of be a mix between some teaching and some midrash. So I'm hoping that you'll be willing to share your own perspective on things. The second thing is that I want to just briefly discuss a little bit of the, perhaps some of the deeper spiritual elements of Passover, especially since the advent of the Messiah, Yeshua, and him being our Passover lamb and kind of instilling some new meaning into the Passover celebration, as well as our understandings of leaven, perhaps. There's lots of little discussions about leaven in the Greek scriptures. So that's what I'm hoping to kind of lay out for you this evening. And I think a great place to start is in the book of Exodus, kind of with the initial instructions. So the first thing, I'm going to share my screen with you. And the first thing that you're going to see here is actually our calendar, because I want to just give you a heads up on our calendar. I don't often do this, but around the holy days I do sometimes. This is our April calendar. We are here at the 12th, and we have no meeting next week because it's the third Friday of the month. And then the meeting after that is going to be Passover itself. And so we'll be meeting for Passover and unleavened bread on the 22nd. And then we will meet again. I won't meet on this time. Frankly, we're going to have to tear the house apart and remove all the furniture to get the people in here for Passover. And then there's no way I can put the house back together by the 26th, so we won't be getting back together on that Friday night. But we will get together for the Feast of First Fruits on the 28th, it looks like, of April. That's a Sunday evening. So we'll kind of be observing a Yom HaBikurim and the Shemini Atzeret kind of thing, that eighth day kind of idea of the last day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So there's your remaining of April, for the month of April, for our meeting times. And
is that all online?
That is also on the home page, right on the home page of our website.
Now, are you going to broadcast both those online?
Oh, probably not.
Okay, just the online people would know.
Yeah, the online people, yeah. If you want to get access to this, you can go to our website. It's right on the home page every month. Now, Passover, the practical and the spiritual. And that's in that photo right there, you can see the house is empty except for tables for eating. So all the furniture in here is going bye-bye. Now, let's start in the inauguration of the Passover. I would like to read for you Exodus chapter 12. So this is going right back to the beginning of when Passover was inaugurated. So if you would, you can open your Bible to the book of Exodus chapter 12. And I want to read the basic instructions to you from a couple of different perspectives. This is amazing. I love reading this portion. It's such an amazing portion of Scripture. But let's have a little story time with Uncle Alan. You guys ready to rock? Here is Exodus chapter 12. Yah said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month is to be the beginning of months for you. It is the first month of your year. Tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month they must each select an animal of the flock according to their father's households, one animal per household. If the household is too small for a whole animal, that person and the neighbor nearest his house are to select one based on the combined number of people. You should apportion the animal according to what each person will eat. You must have an unblemished animal, a year-old male. You may take it from either the sheep or the goats. You are to keep it until the 14th day of this month. Then the whole assembly of the community of Israel will slaughter the animals at twilight. They must take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and the lintel of the houses where they eat them. They are to eat the meat that night. They should eat it roasted over the fire along with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Do not eat any of it raw or cooked in boiling water, but only roasted over fire, its head as well as its legs and inner organs. Do not let any of it remain until morning. You must burn up any part of it that does remain before morning. Here is how you must eat it. You must be dressed for travel, your sandals on your feet and your staff in your hand. You are to eat it in a hurry. It is Yah's Passover. I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night and strike every firstborn male in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. I am Yah. I will execute judgments against all the gods of Egypt. The blood of the houses where you are staying will be a distinguishing mark for you. When I see the blood, I will pass over you. No plague will be among you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. This day is to be a memorial for you, and you must celebrate it as a festival to Yah. You are to celebrate it throughout your generations as a permanent statute. You must eat unleavened bread for 7 days. On the first day you must remove yeast from your houses, or leaven. Whoever eats what is leavened from the first day through the 7th day must be cut off from Israel. You are to hold a sacred assembly on the first day and another sacred assembly on the 7th day. No work may be done on those days except for preparing what people need to eat. You may do only that. You are to observe the festival of unleavened bread because on this very day I brought your divisions out of the land of Egypt. You must observe this day throughout your generations as a permanent statute. You are to eat unleavened bread in the first month, from the evening of the 14th day of the month until the evening of the 21st day. Yeast or leaven must not be found in your houses for 7 days. If anyone eats something leavened, that person, whether a foreign resident or a native of the land, must be cut off from the community of Israel. Do not eat anything leavened. Eat unleavened bread in all your homes. Then Moses summoned all the elders of Israel and said to them, "Go, select an animal from the flock according to your families and slaughter the Passover animal. Take a cluster of hyssop, dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and brush the lintel and the 2 doorposts with some of the blood in the basin. None of you may go out the door of his house until morning. When Yah passes through to strike Egypt and sees the blood on the lintel and the 2 doorposts, he will pass over the door and not let the destroyer enter your houses to strike you. Keep this command permanently as a statute for you and your descendants. When you enter the land that Yah will give you as he promised, you are to observe this ritual. When your children ask you, 'What does this ritual mean to you?' you are to reply, 'It is the Passover sacrifice to Yah, for he passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when he struck the Egyptians and spared our homes.' So the people bowed down and worshipped. Then the Israelites went and did this. They did just as Yah had commanded Moses and Aaron. Now at midnight, Yah struck every firstborn male in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on his throne to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon, and every firstborn of the livestock. During the night, Pharaoh got up, he along with all his officials and all the Egyptians, and there was loud wailing throughout Egypt because there wasn't a house without someone dead. He summoned Moses and Aaron during the night and said, "Get up, leave my people, both you and the Israelites, and go, worship Yah as you have asked. Take even your flocks and your herds as you asked, and leave, and also bless me." Now the Egyptians pressured the people in order to send them quickly out of the country, for they said, "We're all going to die." So the people took their dough before it was leavened, with their kneading bowls wrapped up in their clothes on their shoulders. The Israelites acted on Moses' word and asked the Egyptians for silver and gold jewelry and for clothing. And Yah gave the people such favor in the Egyptians' sight that they gave them what they requested. In this way they plundered the Egyptians. The Israelites traveled from Ramesses to Sukkot, about 600,000 soldiers on foot besides their families. A mixed multitude also went up with them, along with a huge number of livestock, both flocks and herds. The people baked the dough they had brought out of Egypt into unleavened loaves, since it had no yeast, for when they had been driven out of Egypt they could not delay and had not prepared any provisions for themselves. The time that the Israelites lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of 430 years, on that same day, all Yah's divisions went out from the land of Egypt. It was a night of vigil in honor of Yah, because he would bring them out of the land of Egypt. This same night is in honor of Yah, a night vigil for all the Israelites throughout their generations. Yah said to Moses and Aaron, "This is the statute of the Passover. No foreigner may eat it, but any slave a man has purchased may eat it, after you have circumcised him. A temporary resident or hired hand may not eat the Passover. It is to be eaten in one house. You may not take any of the meat outside the house, and you may not break any of its bones. The whole community of Israel must celebrate it. If a foreigner resides with you and wants to celebrate Yah's Passover, every male in his household must be circumcised, and then he may participate. He will become like a native of the land, but no uncircumcised person may eat of it. The same law will apply to both the native and the foreigner who resides among you." Then all the Israelites did this. They did just as Yah had commanded Moses and Aaron. On that same day, Yah brought the Israelites out of the land of Egypt according to their divisions. That is the whole of that chapter, pretty much. Isn't it? I read the whole thing, didn't I? Yeah, so that is the initial instructions. That gives you lots of detail there. And so I want you to contemplate for just a moment what instructions you saw in there. Now, there were some instructions in there that are commonly thought to only apply in that situation, such as putting the blood on the doorposts. Nobody does that except a few people. I have actually met one person in my life who actually paints blood on their door.
Where do they get the blood?
They actually slaughter a lamb.
Oh.
Now, it's not a sacrifice, but they butcher their own lamb, and they.
I've heard of putting wine on it.
Yeah, some people might put wine on the door or something like that. So there are several commands in there which, as we continue to look at these passages, you'll see carry forward, because he does in that passage give some clear instructions for the people who were partaking in that life-saving event at that time. But he also, you notice, gave some instructions regarding this is going on in perpetuity, and he did give some instructions regarding that. So just begin to contemplate in your mind, what are those instructions? Because ultimately, we got to answer the question of what's for me, what's still going on, what is happening in perpetuity. How do I do that? So I think we need to discuss that briefly. And I think most of you are fully, pretty much on board with how that stuff goes down. But that's the inauguration of the Passover. Okay, the instructions for the initial service and the memorial. Now I want to take us to Leviticus 23, 4 through 8, because these are the instructions that are reiterated by Moses when he begins to give the Torah. Further Torah instructions, I should say. Leviticus 23, 4 through 8, says this. This is the reminder. Just as FYI, before we read this, I mentioned when we started this that I have to refresh myself. And I think that you can see that in the Torah, in the prophets, in the writings, in the New Testament, it's the same group of instructions that are just given over and over and over. Why did they do that?
Repetition to get it in your heart, your soul, and your mind.
Repetition is really critical. And I know that you might get sick of hearing it. I totally get that, of people saying the same thing over and over and over, but that's why you remember stuff. And I do probably tend to say the same things over and over. I know I do, as a matter of fact, because I get accused of it all the time. David, what's up, brother?
I was just saying that I think partly with the witness of 2 or 3.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, David. That's a good point. He said that's 2 or 3 witnesses, and that's a great point. As you search out your Bible, I did like most people would. I went to my Bible software and I said, show me everywhere in both the New and the Old Testaments where it says the word Pesach. Found something interesting this year too, which you know how it is when you're doing something, you're like, I never saw that before. I probably did, but I forgot. But I'll bring that to your attention in a moment. But yeah, we're repeating this stuff over and over and over. Moses repeated these instructions how many times in just the Torah? 3 times. Once in Exodus, once in Leviticus, and once in Deuteronomy. And there's a time in Numbers where he gives a little extra instructions for those who might be unclean and need to observe the second Passover. So basically 4 times. So let's take a look at Leviticus 23, 4 through 8. It says, these are Yah's appointed times, the sacred assemblies that you are to proclaim at their appointed times. The Passover to Yah comes in the 1st month at twilight on the 14th day of the month. By the way, I'm going to interrupt there. You realize that just a couple of days ago was New Year Day. It was New Year's. If you're reckoning by the biblical calendar, that little sliver you saw in the sky the other day was actually the New Year's. The festival of unleavened bread to Yah is on the 15th day of the same month. For 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. On the 1st day, you were to hold a sacred assembly. You were not to do any regular work. You are to present a fire offering to Yah for 7 days. Here's a little bit of an innovation here, something added in. On the 7th day, there will be a sacred assembly. You must not do any regular work. So that is the whole of those instructions from Leviticus 23. That's just a kind of a truncated version, let me just give you the highlights, just the highlight reel there. It's kind of like, I think of it as a Cliff Notes version there. Now, if you want to click over to Deuteronomy 16, we're going to take, because those instructions are a little bit more elaborate. This is Moses giving his final instructions before he's about to die. He's like preaching his final sermon, and he's really wanting to pound home the most important points before he dies. Deuteronomy 16, starting in verse 1 through verse 8, we have a reiteration of the Passover. Here's what it says. Observe the month of Aviv and celebrate the Passover to Yah your Elohim. Because Yah your Elohim brought you out of Egypt by night in the month of Aviv. Sacrifice to Yah your Elohim a Passover animal from the herd or flock in the place where Yah chooses to have his name dwell. You must not eat leavened bread with it. For 7 days you are to eat unleavened bread with it, the bread of hardship, because you left the land of Egypt in a hurry, so that you may remember for the rest of your life the day you left the land of Egypt. No yeast is to be found anywhere in your territory for 7 days, and none of the meat you sacrifice in the evening of the 1st day is to remain until morning. You are not to sacrifice the Passover animal in any of the towns that Yah your Elohim is giving you. You must only sacrifice the Passover animal at the place where Yah your Elohim chooses to have his name dwell. Do this in the evening as the sun sets at the same time of day you departed from Egypt. You are to cook and eat it in the place Yah your Elohim chooses, and you are to return to your tents in the morning. You must eat unleavened bread for 6 days. On the 7th day there is to be a solemn assembly to Yah your Elohim, and you must not do any work. All right, those are 3 of the 4 passages that are from the Torah that give you some clarity on the Feast of Passover. Remember that Numbers chapter 5, I think it is, I could be wrong about that.
33.
Numbers 33 has a little section, and I believe that Numbers 9 and 28 also have a little passage there. It's not much, but there is a little bit of additional information there, specifically for the person who is unclean or is on a long journey. Do you remember anybody who might have been unclean or on a long journey in the New Testament? Paul. Yes, he was trying to get back to Jerusalem by the time of the feast. But I think that there was a year when he didn't quite make it there. So he is able to do that. So I want to just note for you a couple passages to do a little further exploration for yourself if you want to do that. I don't believe that I put them on the slides. Oh, I know I did. Look at me go. Further passages to examine. Numbers 9, 1 through 14, which is instructions about the second Passover. Numbers 28, 16 through 25 includes the daily fire offerings, a little bit more clarity on that. Joshua 5, 10 through 11 is the first Passover in the land of Canaan. And also make note that in Numbers 9, I believe that is the first anniversary of the Passover. That was their first time observing the Passover in the wilderness. And then here in Joshua 5, 10 through 11, you get the first Passover in the land of Canaan. Not a lot of details there. There is some interesting details in regard to when this is in regards to the cycle of grain and when they harvested their crops. Some people use that passage to prove interesting and wonderful things. In Ezra chapter 6, verses 19 through 22, the exiles who return from Babylon observe a Passover. And there's some interesting information regarding the priests having cleansed themselves in order to offer this sacrifice because they had rebuilt the temple, at least the altar and the temple, and kind of put things back together. It wasn't in great shape, but there it was. It was sanctified for 8 days, and they fired it up. So they did have a functional priesthood with an altar and a temple. So there's some interesting things, and that's important for a couple of reasons, which I'll talk to you about in a few minutes. But here are the questions that I have for us. What parts apply to us today? What parts are absolutely clear, and what parts are slightly hazy, not totally clear on what's going on there? And are there any parts that are temporary or might have changed over time? Those are the questions that I have, and this is the portion where we might just decide we're going to fire up the midrash for a second, because I would like for you to let me know in your experience, in your understanding, what is actually going on here. What are the parts that are, for you, that are clear, that are unequivocal? Would anyone like to share? Let's see. Who is it? It's Cadence. Somebody hand that girl a microphonics. Coming back to you, David, just a moment. Go ahead, Cadence.
The one thing that's pretty clear to me is...
No. You must speak louder.
Oh. The one thing that's pretty clear to me is that you're not supposed to have any leaven within your whole camp. I know that some people either give it to their neighbor to hold on to it, and then they'll take it back, or they put it in their garage or in a closet. I'm not bashing you if you do, but that's pretty clear that it's not supposed to be anywhere.
So we are bashing you if you do. You're skirting the rules.
So we are bashing you, just so you're clear. No, I that's a great question, and you said within all your borders. So it's pretty clear that it seems to say, especially in your home, within your borders. That might be a little challenging nowadays because we don't exactly have borders as a nation of God-fearing people who are observing Passover. But certainly you have purview over your own home, so there should definitely not be any leaven in your own home. That is your understanding. Would anyone disagree with that? And I'm not looking for an argument. I'm just wondering if we have different. I'm certain that we're going to come across some differences of opinion, and we will treat each other with dignity and respect, except me. Because I am often treating people with no dignity and no respect, as evidenced by me getting into heated arguments every once in a while, and it's just delightful. I love it, and I hope that I'm not offending anyone. David, you're up, brother.
I wish to offer no argument with regard to cleaning out the leaven, right?
Okay.
At 100%. The thing, it was ironic because I was channeling my inner Alan this week, reading from Exodus 12 and Leviticus 23. And the things that I was caught up a little bit on had to do with the same things that you were kind of saying. You mentioned Rosh Chodesh, which is the biblical New Year, right?
Right.
And then the second thing I mentioned to some people about my studies had to do with the 10th day, when you would take a lamb in the house and it references your fathers, right? Which I thought was a beautiful reference. What I wanted to call people's attention to is that there's actually a Jewish day set aside for this, the 10th of Nisan, which they refer to as Yom Haliyah or Aliyah, right? And the interpretation of that word, or your Hebrew word of the day, is the rise.
Going up. That's right.
I like that one. So that was
Nice.
it. That's all I wanted to share.
Nice. Thank you, David. That's a good insight, and I think this is something that we will not discuss because it's too contentious and there's too many ideas about what it is. But, Cadence said, I think it's pretty clear that you're supposed to get leaven out of your house, and you are correct. However, the question arises, what is leaven? We ain't touching that. We ain't touching that with a 10-foot pole. You get to decide what leaven is. If you're looking through your cabinets for anything that can be a type of a leavening agent of any kind, if you are looking for things that have to do with yeast, man, that can go crazy. So we ain't talking about that.
I have a good question about that because,
You have a question about what?
about the leaven in the house, because,
Okay, hold on. Give her a mic. Yeah, you got to get the mic.
Yeah.
But no, you can't go because Bob's waiting. But you can't. We're no cutting. No, Bob online. Just hold the microphone. Bob, go, buddy. Bob online.
At least I'm not Bob the Builder today.
Bob the Builder.
That's even better.
All right, go, Bob.
So your question here is what parts apply to you today? And Caden had brought up about the boundaries. I think in this modern era, you can look at the boundaries of your area by what your official survey is for your property.
I think that's totally reasonable. Yeah. That's your boundary.
Yeah. That's what would make logical sense to me.
Absolutely. I think you're totally right. You have control over your domicile and the boundaries of your property. So, yeah, Bob is correct. Coming back to you, Brett. Go ahead.
This
Cindy.
is just
I was going to come on his comment.
go ahead.
though.
No, go ahead. That's fine.
I mean, Yeshua didn't have any home, and some of us don't have a home. Is your house not your body?
Oh, great insight, Brett. And I'm hold on to that thought because I think we need to develop that a little bit later. Somebody said, well, I may not live in a home that I control. I might have a roommate where I'm living with someone else. Do I try to tell them, hey man, we got to get out? No, you can't do that in somebody else's house. The A and B, yes, there is a spiritual aspect, and we'll come to that a little bit later when we look at the spiritual aspects of this whole feast to say, A, where is the house that Yah chose to put his name? That's a physical aspect, and you got a spiritual aspect, as well as a physical aspect. Sorry, Cindy.
No worries. Well, I have some preps and I have some baking soda.
Preps?
And, like prep food, like
Oh,
things
yeah,
like,
okay.
And they're canned and they're whatever. But I got boxes of baking soda that I don't even remember I had, and that's a leavening agent. And I'm like,
Baking soda is a leavening agent?
yeah. And I'm like, am I supposed to like throw?
Are we in
6
100%
boxes
agreement
of
that baking soda
away?
is leaven?
Yes, it is. Absolutely.
And so what do you do with preps that you're not intending to use? You're just storing it in the house. If you put it out, you might spoil it, or you can't.
So
put it
what
in
was the
garage.
question?
What do you do with something like that? That's
Hold on for you.
Oh, if you want to
then
be
you're
a
causing your
if
neighbor
you
to
want
have
to be
leaven
a
in
Jew,
their
you can
house.
give it to your
Your
neighbor.
doesn't practice what you practice.
no, I know. That's true. Is that what you do? Do you have to like worry about?
You know, that's a great hey, that's a great question, and that is a judgment call. I'm not going to tell you that you should throw it away or that you should give it to your neighbor. That's one of those things that you have to wrestle with your own conscience and God and decide what you're going to do. I think Callie's going to tell me to say. Yeah, Callie's like, wait a minute. Callie is talking about if leaven represents sin and we're just passing it over to our neighbor, that's kind of an interesting picture.
What if we put it in an irrevocable trust?
Put it into an irrevocable trust. Yes, that's a great idea. All right, hold on. Take a deep breath. Bob, I apologize. Go, Bob.
Now he's
My suggestion would be is
Wait.
put the
Sorry,
items
Bob.
in your
Sorry,
car
Bob.
and park it
Wait.
out on the street.
Hold on, Bob. I apologize. Say that again. I couldn't hear you.
My suggestion would be to put it in your car and park it out on the street, since the street is not legally your boundary.
Okay, Bob's got a good idea. Put it in the trunk of your car and park it on the street. That's public property. Oh.
Now he's not Bob the Builder. He's Go Bob.
He's Go Bob.
Is that what it was?
That's right. Oh, you guys are funny. My son built sourdough. He loved doing bread all the time, and it's like that's a lot of work to get a starter going. Do you want to get that stuff gone and throw it out and have to start over? I mean, there are people in Europe who have yeast that has been growing for like 700 years, and that's a pride issue for them. But now, let me ask you a question. Do you think that there is a practical reason that Yah might have said, get rid of your leaven once per year? It is entirely possible that there is a perfectly good, not just a spiritual reason, that is just some kind of mind game where we're thinking about wonderful, clever metaphors for what leaven might be, but just a real practical, down-to-earth reason that you should not eat leaven that is that old. I'm just throwing that out there.
That's the answer.
What is the answer? I have no idea, but is there a possibility that...
Your wine gets better with age. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, I don't know. Wine gets better with age. I don't know if leaven does. I assume I like yeast, frankly, but... All right, control yourselves, knuckleheads. Here comes Tracy.
We're all in our club.
Here she comes.
Deborah, dial back. Go ahead.
I was just
Tracy.
going to relate. Like, I've been studying this a lot over the years and trying to figure out what leaven is in my house and all that. When it dawned on me as I was studying about the leaven that they would have had. And like you said, it's some sort of sourdough starter. And we know that the leaven spiritually is teaching of men, doctrine, hypocrisy, sin, wickedness. These are all things that the scriptures define as leaven. And so when you look at this yeast that you're feeding, you have to feed it and you have to keep it alive, and you grow very attached to it, especially these ones that have been passed down from years and years and years. And how does that relate to doctrine? This is the same thing that's happened to us where we're like, I don't want to let go of that. I love Christmas. I don't want to let go of that. I love this. So this is the idea, I think, that's being drawn, at least in my mind, specifically to how we maintain a sourdough starter. So if you have one, then throwing it out after that first year, yeah, it's tough, but you're not attached to it. And one more note, as I was studying this, I'm assuming it's still correct. The oldest leaven is actually from Egypt. They resurrected it. So I mean that's very interesting to me too.
That is a fascinating thing, isn't it? Yeah. Tracy?
I actually have a study on my YouTube channel called "Do Not Offer the Blood of My Sacrifice with Leaven," which goes into all this. If anybody's interested in watching
Take a look. Yeah, take a look at that, you guys. That's good. That's good stuff. Tracy's on the YouTube channel for Tracy. Who is it? It's Bob Clement. What's up, Bob?
Question for Tracy. After this, would you be able to contact me on Discord so I can get your YouTube channel?
Tracy, just post it in the Tracy. You can post it in the chat thing here, right here, Bob. Or she can also put it in the Discord. Either way.
Yeah, I'll do both.
Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you, Tracy.
Yeah, Tracy's got some great teachings on her YouTube channel and on her website, so take a look at that. Questions? More questions? Obviously, we're going to have more questions than answers. Thank you, Steve. Bethany, what's on your mind, sister?
Okay, so I've been trying to kind of separate on Passover tradition and biblical. For instance, tradition, egg, biblical, bitter fruit, bitter herbs. The cups.
The 4 cups?
Where can we find those 4 cups in the Bible? Because I'm finding like hints of one, the cup of blessing, and that's about it.
Yeah. No, that is a great question. Bethany is asking, in case you didn't hear, where are the 4 cups? And I'm confident. I am fairly confident. Let me back that up just a little bit. I am fairly confident that you'll find them. If you want to find them, you'll find them. I thought that for a long time, whenever I would come, because I have read many rabbinic works. I have. I enjoy it. It's quite fascinating. But I have been puzzled over the years as I opened up the Mishnah and the Talmud and flipped through some things, and that's interesting. Sometimes I have stumbled over things that just sound completely numbskullish to me. I don't know, where did you get that? I cannot see the connection in the Torah at all. But if you dig a little bit below the surface, there is something there that is suggestive, always. You can't just see it necessarily right there on the page of the Mishnah or the Talmud. You have to look at all the commentary of the other rabbis, and they say, oh yeah, our so-and-so said of so-and-so that they practiced it this way because of this passage over in this book. And it's like, there's always some reason that they put it in there. Sometimes it's tenuous, and I have a hard time seeing it. But a lot of times, I'm like, okay, I can understand why you did that. Would I have done that? Would I have made that leap? No, probably not. But there is a biblical foundation for why they do these things. It just might be a leap sometimes.
She mentioned it was like the oral law, which...
The oral law is a whole separate ball of beans.
True, but don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because there is reality to that oral law.
There is.
Before it was written, it had to be oral. So there is something to that, and we don't understand it.
Very true.
Most of us don't, I should say.
Very true. David and then Tracy.
The one thing I was going to point out, and partly this is interpretive, but I believe that a lot of people view that passage about a covenant with many for 1 week. I view it as a week of 7,000 years.
Yeah.
So the whole lamb thing and all that, I don't really go in for that, or painting my door in blood or anything like that. I tend to model after Yeshua. So we've got a model. If you want to read about it, you can go to like lots of passages. But I think Mark 14 is really crazy prophetic passage, by the way, because they don't call it the Last Supper, by the way. They call it Passover, right? And they're eating bread, unleavened bread and wine.
Right.
That's what I focus on. I just kind of it's like a communion for me.
Yeah, sure.
Bread, unleavened bread and wine. Try to keep it simple.
Yeah. And there's a big debate about whether this was actually a Passover or whether it was some kind of weird thing. Definitely not touching that. But, it's interesting that there is definitely a mention of wine and unleavened bread. There's no mention of bitter herbs in that Passover that Yeshua observed with his disciples. Presumably there is. Hold on to that stinky thought. we'll deal with that in a second. Tracy, thank you for your patience.
No problem. I was actually going to comment on the bitter herbs because this is something else that's absolutely amazing that I found. Because we are commanded to eat the unleavened bread with it says bitter herbs in italics in the command. And that's, when you look at the word, it's merorim, which is bitterness. So we are to eat, it says to eat unleavened bread with bitterness, they shall eat the Passover. And so that word bitterness is the same word used in Zechariah 12. Talks about 12 verse 10, I will pour upon the house of David and upon its inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and of supplications, and they shall look on me whom they have pierced. They shall mourn for him as one mourns for his only son, and shall be in bitterness for him, marar, as one that is in bitterness, marar, for his firstborn. So this is also pointing us to the Passover, and this, I believe, it's symbolic for the bitterness that we feel for what he had to do for us. And so, you can incorporate bitter herbs as a reminder of that. I don't see anything wrong with that. We do, but we make sure that when at our Passover, we explain why and what this bitterness should represent to the believer in Messiah.
Good. Excellent. Cindy?
Okay, so I'm not sure, but I'm thinking the bitter herb thing that we don't see in the Passover meal that Yeshua had with his disciples might have something to do with Judas Iscariot when he dipped his sop. Possibly.
Yeah, that's certainly, I think that's a good idea. It doesn't say specifically, but it does stand to reason because, we are, we dip bitter herbs into sop or charoset. No, that's the other stuff. That's the other stuff. David Branton, go, buddy.
I was going to say an alternative translation of that memresh yod is rebellion. So since
yeah, totally. Thank you, sir. So, questions? Yes. Would you hand that back, Steve? I'm sorry. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
This is Liesel.
Yes, I was curious so eat it in haste. We spent 3 hours around our table last year. I was curious what
You were not in haste.
We did not.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I take it that those things are connected. Eat it in haste with your shoes on your feet and your staff in your hand, ready to go. Eat it hastily. That's a great question. I don't know that I could answer that definitively, but I take those statements to be connected, and I also think that those are most likely connected to the actual inauguration event, which is eat the food, observe that night, do it quickly, make sure that you're ready to go because things are about to happen in rapid succession. This is not going to, I think interestingly enough, that Passover, the first Passover that inaugurated this thing was not a joyous occasion, I'm sure. Okay, they're probably scared out of their wits, thinking they're all going to die. And then around midnight, the green fog starts going through Egypt and people are screaming and dying all over the place. That doesn't sound like fun.
No one was having fun.
Excuse me?
No one was having fun, but I'm sure they were
Yeah, it doesn't
grateful.
seem like anybody was having fun, at least not in the movie I watched. But, sorry.
But they were also told to eat it in haste.
Yeah, that's what she's asking is, what about haste? I think that's specific to that Passover. Now, you might, as a person who is, thank you, Tracy, a person who is interested in the second Exodus, the greater Exodus, as you will, consider that perhaps that might happen again someday, where Father is, you've read these passages in the prophets where it's like, no longer will they say, blessed is Yah who brought them out of the land of Egypt, but blessed is Yah who brought them from all over the world to one place. So you might have implications later to where, there might be a Passover some year where you're like sitting there having your Passover, and then bam, at like 4 o'clock in the morning, something happens where you got to jump up and leave. And it might have been interesting if you had decided all along, you know what, I'm going to put my backpack on and have a staff in my hand and get my walking shoes on, and I'm going to observe Passover in that way. Would that be an interesting thing? It certainly would be. Am I advocating that you should? Not necessarily, but it could be interesting as a prophetic thing that might happen someday. Who knows? Tracy, go, girl.
I was just thinking about the connections of like how this sounds a lot like Sodom and Gomorrah when it was like, get in and get out. And
Right.
then Messiah with Luke 17 and Matthew 24, he's like, don't go back, get out.
Yes.
So it probably has something to give us instruction for future reference.
I believe
Thief in a
you're
night
right.
kind of thing.
Yeah, I believe you're probably right. That's why I'm saying, I don't know about you. I have a go bag. I'm good to go. But I have not actually had a Passover where I'm like sitting with my backpack on and my staff in my hand and my hiking shoes on, thinking, okay, here we go, man. You never know. I might have to leave, first thing in the morning. It's an interesting concept. And you're absolutely right. There are some prophetic passages by Yeshua himself that's like, hey, when you see the abomination of desolation, do not pass go, do not collect $200. Just get up and go. So there is some interesting implications there. Questions. I'm running slightly behind, but I think we're doing okay. Oh, I do want to get to a couple of spiritual aspects of the Passover. Probably not going to do it, but whatever. Who is it? I have no idea. It's Tiny Tracer. Can you eat meat for Passover? Do you see that in there anywhere? Any prohibition on eating meat? Any prohibition on eating lamb? Do the strictures of Exodus apply to you eating lamb? What about you go to your butcher and you get a nice leg of lamb? Do you think they broke the bones to give it to you? Of course they did. You ain't roasting it whole. I mean, I suppose you could get a whole lamb and roast it whole, but most of us aren't going to do that because we're not going to eat a whole lamb. And am I certainly not going to burn it in the fireplace if I can't eat the whole thing? That's an expensive chunk of flesh. So, what do you think of that? Is it okay to, would a guy who's like, you know what, I'm getting the whole family together and we've got a lamb, we're going to kill it, we're going to roast it on the fire. Is that a sacrifice? No. Could you try to make it a sacrifice and make yourself an abomination? Yes, you could. Yes, you could. If you had it in your mind, let's say for the sake of discussion that you took the admonition that you are a nation of priests. Well, the book of Hebrews says I'm a priest. And I got the Spirit of Yah in me. I'm going to slaughter this animal. And I'm going to put its blood on my door, and I'm going to do the whole shebang. I would be terrified to be within 100 yards of you. Just telling you. I'm all for being a priest after, a certain sense. Am I going to start slaughtering animals and calling it a sacrifice? No, I am not. That would be me pulling a Nadab and Abihu. I'd have to be expecting that the fire of Yah would come forth and just burn me up. So, question remains, is it okay to, I'm going to get some steaks, I'm going to get some chicken. You know that Jews will not eat lamb for Passover. You will never see a Jew eat lamb for Passover. Why is that? Well, okay, so Deb says because they don't believe in Messiah. Well, they don't believe in our Messiah. That now see, they would think so they're thinking that's a sacrifice animal. We can't, we don't have a temple. We can't slaughter it. So theoretically, yes, if you're going to have, and you know that the text was pretty clear that says you're not going to slaughter animals in all your towns where you live. You're only going to slaughter the animal in the place where Yah chooses to place his name. Now, going back to what Brett said a moment ago, well, you are the house. You are the spiritual house where God has placed his name. Fair enough. But you're walking a fine line here. What do? Are you slaughtering an animal? That's a good question. These are some of the things that you have to kind of work out and talk through. Was someone going to, David, go.
Yeah, if you guys ever study Jewish prayer, one of the things that comes up is the collective term for the blind, right? And ironically, it's if I said that the word for Hebrews is Ivrim, the collective term for the blind is Ivrim. It's crazy. The subtle difference has to do with the sacrifice.
Yeah.
And I believe that sacrifice is the lamb without spot or blemish of the first year.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The reason they don't eat of that sacrifice or the lamb probably has a little bit to do with some blindness, but I'll leave it at that.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Tracy, were you going to say something else?
Yeah, I was just gonna tell you a little something that we do at our Passover that I feel like is very meaningful to us.
Okay.
Well, first of all, when we read about the Passover, it is not our sacrifice, it is Yahovah's sacrifice for us. It's very specific with the verbiage.
Sure.
And we know that Abraham offering up Isaac is prophetic for the Messiah. And it says, you shall not offer the blood of my sacrifice with leaven, and that word shekat is in Hebrew is offer, and that's used again in Abraham and Isaac's story.
Yep.
So he's offering up Isaac in the same way, and he lifted his eyes and looked and saw that there was a lamb provided or a ram instead of his son. But the question was, Isaac said, "But where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" And Abraham, according to Hebrews 11, in faith answered, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering. And so he looked forward to Messiah's day and was glad. And this is again Yahovah's sacrifice for us. And so at this time, we talk about this and we look back to his sacrifice, to his day, and are glad. So if someone were to ask us at our Passover meal, where is the lamb for your offering? We would answer the same way, except past tense. God has provided for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, as it is written. Therefore, it is just as he said, in the Mount of Yahovah, he has provided.
Right.
So that's our answer in our home. So I just thought I'd pass that on.
I like it. That's a great insight, Tracy, and I like the practice. Absolutely. Couple more quick questions. Circumcision. Got to be circumcised? Can anybody come over and have Passover with you?
No.
Are you going to do a circumcision check at the front door?
Circumcision of the heart?
Okay, now somebody is saying, wait a minute, what about circumcision of the heart? Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so now hold on a second. You know how many of us for many years got ourselves in trouble by saying, well, there's a physical thing that you're supposed to do, but you know, as Christians, all those instructions in the Torah are spiritual now. I don't need to physically keep that commandment because it's been spiritualized by Jesus. You ever heard that? That's a quite common thing in Christianity to say, yeah, we don't really keep those things literally. They're spiritual now. You're on a really slippery slope when you start saying, okay, wait, I don't need to literally keep those commandments. They're spiritual. You're playing with some dangerous stuff there when you start trying to do that. So am I saying you should be physically circumcised? I don't know, am I? I ain't touching that. I'm just saying, that's something we have to think about as you look at the commandments of the Torah and you think there's always a spiritual element to every physical command. Does that mean I get to spiritualize all of the commandments because I don't really want to do that? I can just make it spiritual? It's always been spiritual. You can ask a question, but not until Cindy gives up the microphone. Go ahead, Callie.
I know you're not saying that you're asking if you should be circumcised, but I know, I don't know where it's at, but I know in the New Testament there was some debate, right?
Oh,
Because
yeah.
they were wanting the Gentile believers to be circumcised, and then they said no.
Right.
So then why would somebody have to be physically circumcised
Right.
to join in your...
That is a great question that Callie asked regarding, there was a contentious issue in the period of the renewed covenant in the New Testament when they were having a big argument about circumcision. And that's a wonderful conversation. It's a fairly lengthy one, but I will throw out a couple of key points. David, do you have your hand raised?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Can you hold on to that? Or you got something hot on the presses you need to throw out here?
It's in here, sir.
What's that?
I said, no, continue.
Oh, okay. So that's a great question, Callie, and you're absolutely right that when they're talking about the circumcision in the book of Acts, okay, specifically Acts 10 through 15, we have a huge issue because the Pharisees are saying of the Gentiles who are coming in, it is needful that we circumcise them and instruct them to keep the Torah of Moses. And some of the other disciples, and these are disciples and followers of Yeshua. These aren't Jews who are unbelievers saying, force them to get circumcised. No, these are believers who just happen to be Pharisaical believers saying, yes, it is needful to have them circumcised and instruct them to keep the Torah of Moses. Now, what's the decision? What is the decision that comes down? Acts chapter 15, okay? So you've heard the common quote, well, these are the 4 instructions that they give them in Acts chapter 15. Did they leave something out? Well, they left a whole lot of stuff out. So why did they only give them 4 things? And what about all the rest of the stuff? Okay, that's okay. So what are the 4 things? No fornication, defilement of idols, strangled by blood and strangulation, and what else? Blood. Yeah, trafe, blood, sexual immorality, and idolatry. Why those 4 specific things? Does anybody know?
Was it like rampant where they were? Was that...
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yes. Okay. That's a great insight, and I think that that's important. That those issues are huge in that day. Did you also know that according to the oral tradition of the rabbis, that is called by them the heart of the Torah? Some of the most important commands of the Torah are those 4 things. Just a side note. But here's the thing notice what James said right at the beginning there. He says, let's tell them to do these 4 things. Because why? Moses is preached in the synagogue every Shabbat. Now, I take that to mean we're bringing in a bunch of prostitutes. I'm just letting you know, we are bringing in a bunch of prostitutes. No, I'm kidding, we're not. What I'm saying though is if there was a big conversion event and a bunch of prostitutes wanted to come in here and fellowship with us, what's the first thing I'm going to tell them? Yes. Put some clothes on. That's the first thing I'm going to tell them. You can come in here and fellowship. If you're ready to repent of your past deeds and blah, 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 you're not going to be a whore anymore, bring some appropriate clothing and stop engaging in sexual immorality because that's relevant to them. And frankly, they're not going to be able to fellowship with us if they're dressed in really inappropriate clothing and they're still whoring, okay? So I believe that those 4 things are critical to those people being able to join the family. You can't come in here and join us in our fellowship if you're bringing in unclean things to share at our feast, at our table time, if you're bringing in idolatrous practices, if you're bringing in sexual immorality, we're not going to be able to fellowship together. They're not going to be able to go to the synagogue on Shabbat and hear Moses taught. So did they overlook circumcision? That was not the most important thing. Every time they go to Shabbat and listen to Moses taught, what are they going to hear? Thou shalt do this, thou shalt do that, thou shalt not do this, thou shalt do this. So are they eventually probably going to get circumcised?
Yes.
Yeah, they probably are. But here's the big question. And I think that this was what trips up so many believers when they're reading the New Testament with Paul talking in a sense, in a very negative fashion seemingly, about circumcision. What I personally think, and I think there's some great scholarship to back this up, I'm just touting that. Lots of people you can look up. When Paul says circumcision in the New Testament, in 90% of cases, he is not talking about the act of physical circumcision. In those days, circumcision means something different. And I don't mean something different in a totally weird sense. Let me explain what I mean. When you say you must be circumcised, what that is saying is you must convert to Judaism. You notice that they have Gentiles, converts, and Jews. Those are the three. It's not a dichotomy, it's a tripartite kind of thing. They broke the whole world up into three specific groups. There are Jews, there are Gentiles, and there are God-fearers and proselytes. Okay, so there's four of them. Question is, what separates these people from these people? These people have not got any interest in what you're doing over here. These people want to worship your God, but they don't want to follow all your rules. Those are not converts. Those are God-fearers. You notice when Paul keeps going to these synagogues, when he's traveling around the Roman Empire, there are Jews, God-fearers, and proselytes. Proselytes are in the process of becoming a Jew. Full conversion. What's the final step of full conversion? Circumcision. Yeah, full circumcision. So when Paul says, I'm of the circumcision party, and no, you don't need to get circumcised, I personally think that in a lot of cases, he is not actually discussing the act of physically circumcising a penis. He's talking about conversion to Judaism. He's saying if you are relying on conversion to Judaism in order to curry favor with the Father, placing yourself under the yoke of the Pharisees, why would you do that? Why? That's why Peter says to the rest of the people, why would you place a yoke on the disciples that we and our forefathers have never been able to bear? He seems to be denigrating the Word of God. But he can't be saying that because Moses himself says, this is not too hard for you. It's not a heavy yoke. Yeshua says, this is not a heavy yoke. What is Peter talking about? He's talking about these people saying to these Gentiles, you've got to do it our way or you're not really saved. Okay, when he says they have to be circumcised and obey the Torah of Moses, as we say, in the way that we say, in the order that we say, and how we say. And Peter is like, whoa, 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 whoa. Look, man, God already saved them. The power of the Holy Spirit came on them when they hadn't done nothing except believe. Cornelius in his house, he was a God-fearing Gentile who was praying and offering alms and everything was good. He wasn't circumcised. He hadn't converted to Judaism. Why do you put the Spirit of God to the test? Don't be placing a yoke on us that we and our forefathers have never been able to bear. And that is specific to the way that they are interpreting the Torah and the commandments.
Ties to the Hall of Faith where it talks about.
I can't hear you. I can hear you. No one else can. But hold on to that thought. Just going to wrap up that thought. So I hope that answers your question. Does it? Maybe? It's hard. That's a hard question to answer. Because I don't think that, because Paul then circumcised Timothy. Why would he be a hypocrite and say, nobody should get circumcised, but you know what, I'm going to circumcise Timothy just because I think this is a good idea. Seems weird. So we got some issues there, but I do think that Paul was specifically saying, do not convert to Judaism. That would be a huge mistake. Is he saying you should not be circumcised? No, but I think that in those days, those two things were very much equated. And so it can be very confusing for us because we don't really get the historical context of it. That's my thoughts. Sorry, Angela, yes, ma'am?
What you were just...
Sorry.
What you were just saying about how he said that all the extra stuff, the heavy yoke, the burden, the man-made doctrines of the Pharisees,
There's your leaven. Just to
There's
bring
your
it full
yes.
circle.
There's your leaven. And yes, thank you for bringing that up, Cindy. That is leaven, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up because I want to come right around to that in just a second. Go, you get the final word.
Well, I'm just thinking it's on the flip side of what happened in the Hall of Faith in Hebrews, where it talks about Rahab, the prostitute, and all these people that did all these things, but they never actually, they didn't know, they weren't doing it like, you understand what I'm saying? In other words, their faith their works justified them, and they were considered justified by what they did.
Yeah.
So it's like, to me, when I think about the circumcision thing, it's kind of like the baptism thing. It's like, does baptism save you? No, but get wet. Just get wet. You know, it's like, okay, so once you understand the circumcision issue as far as the heart issue, then get circumcised. You know, like, don't fret over it, but I think it's a thing to do. I don't think it's not a thing to do. It's like an obedience act, right? You could look at it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Perhaps.
I know many Hebrew men, not Hebrew men in the sense of Jews, but Hebrew roots men who have decided, you know what? The Father is placing on my heart that I'm going to get circumcised as an adult. And I've had others who think, like, I ain't doing that. You're crazy. So, you know what? I'm not laying down any decisions on that. I'm simply saying, be careful not to spiritualize everything, because there is a spiritual aspect of that. Like I said, there always was. You know, he wants your heart circumcised, but I think that there is a physical representation of the spiritual, like there often is. You know, why do we wear tzitzit? You know, why does he have us do this on a certain day, physically, literally? Some of us are doing a lot of literal physical things. Why would you stop at that one? Because I don't know. That's a tough one. That's a tough question. I don't want to do that. Seriously, that's some hardcore stuff. That would be some real dedication. But I'm just saying, that's a tough one. But I want to bring this around to the spiritual in regards to leaven and a couple of other ideas. Who is it? It's Michael.
I was going to read a verse that was tying into exactly what you were saying.
Okay.
This is in Galatians 6:11.
Yep.
See with what large letters I am writing to you on my own hand. It is those who want to make good showing in the flesh who would force you to be circumcised, and only in order that they may be persecuted for the cross of Christ. For even those who are circumcised do not themselves keep the law, but they desire to have you circumcised that they may boast in your flesh. But far be it from me to boast except in the cross, this is in English, of our Lord Jesus Christ, by which the word has been crucified to me, and I to the world. For neither circumcision counts for anything nor uncircumcision, but a new creation. And as for all who walk by this rule, peace and mercy be upon them and upon the Israel of God. For now on, let no one cause me trouble, for I bear on my body the marks of Jesus. The grace our Lord Jesus Christ be with you, spirit brothers. Amen.
Amen.
So,
Amen.
wrench right into the
Yes, thank you for throwing that bomb into the works there. So, you know, I think, you know, the reason that I bring that up, and it's a tough conversation to have, is because it is very clearly commanded in 2 of those 3 passages, no uncircumcised male may eat of the Passover. You're going to have to interpret what that means. If you're going to say, I am spiritually, my heart is circumcised. I get it. I'm on board. Because you're taking it to the spiritual level. I get that. Other people, somebody is going to have a problem with that. You know how it is. Somebody's going to have a problem with that. But I want to bring you around to an interesting thing. Did you know that when I looked this up, this word Pesach, pay samachet, translated into English as Passover, that same Hebrew spelling is often translated into English as lame. Someone who's lame, like busted leg or whatever. David.
I found the same thing this week from Malachi.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Now, you know what's fascinating to me? He said he found the same passage in Malachi. There's a bunch of passages where the word Pesach is actually translated as lame. And there was one that was fascinating. It's the story of Mephibosheth. You know, Saul's Jonathan's surviving son, David's best friend Jonathan. I want to read this passage to you because I think that this is actually a very interesting and mysterious passage regarding some wonderful things. Think about this, okay? The backstory on this Mephibosheth character and Ziba is that he is the last remaining member of the tribe of Saul and Jonathan. He's the last remaining guy. And remember that David was like, is there anybody left of Jonathan's household that I can show kindness to? And they were like, yeah, Mephibosheth. He's crippled. He's lame, Pesach, because I think he was dropped by his nurse or something when he was a child and he was never right again. But he has a Gentile servant named Ziba who is like in charge of his household. And when David gets ousted from power by one of his rebellious sons, I think it was Absalom, I don't remember exactly who it was, all of the people who were rallying to David went to him. And when they did, David said, where's Mephibosheth? And Ziba lied and said, yeah, he's against you. He doesn't like you. He turned against you and went with your enemies. That was not true. Okay? And now David returns to Jerusalem after having put down his rebellious son, and he confronts both Ziba and Mephibosheth and says to Mephibosheth, why didn't you come out? Why didn't you come out with me? Watch what happens here. In 2 Samuel 19:24, Mephibosheth, Saul's grandson, also went down to meet the king. He had not taken care of his feet, trimmed his mustache, or washed his clothes from the day the king left until the day he returned safely. When he came from Jerusalem to meet the king asked him, Mephibosheth, why didn't you come with me? My lord the king, he replied, my servant Ziba betrayed me. Actually, your servant said, I'll saddle the donkey for myself so that I may ride it and go with the king. Your servant is lame. Ziba slandered your servant to my lord the king. But my lord the king is like the angel of Elohim. So do whatever you think best. For my grandfather's entire family deserves death from my lord the king, but you set your servant among those who eat at your table. So what further right do I have to keep on making appeals to the king? Now here's where it gets very strange. The king said to him, why keep on speaking about these matters of yours? I hereby declare you and Ziba are to divide the land. And Mephibosheth said to the king, instead, since the Lord my king has come out to his palace safely, let Ziba take it all. Now this is weird and fascinating. I want you to consider this. What are the spiritual ramifications of this story? There's something hidden underneath the surface here. You've got a member of the tribe of, it's an Israelite, Mephibosheth, a Gentile servant. The Gentile says of Mephibosheth, to David, a messianic figure, he doesn't like you. The Gentile says to the king, he doesn't like you. He didn't want to follow you. The Mephibosheth says, I never said that. That is not what I said. You lied about me to the king. Now when the king shows up, he's like, what? Why didn't you come with me? Well, your servant, he lied about me. He lied. He tricked me. And he went with you and left me at home. What is going on here? See anything strange here? Is there any prophetic shadow picture here? A group of Gentiles go with the king and say of the natural-born Israelites, they don't like you. We're going with you. And then when the king shows up, he's like, why didn't you come with me? Well, I would have, but they lied to me. They misrepresented me.
Joseph?
Does it sound a little bit like Joseph also? David, what do you think?
I was hearing replacement theology.
Thank you. Replacement theology. That's exactly what is happening. I think that this is a prophetic shadow picture of replacement theology, and it just happens to be connected with the word Pesach, that Mephibosheth is lame. I think it's a mystery, and I think that you're actually seeing a prophetic shadow picture of Gentiles attaching themselves to Messiah and then representing him and lying to him about the Jews and misrepresenting everything to the Jews. What do you think is, you know what brought this to my attention? I was watching a story on YouTube with the kids the other day where they had these Christians debating Jesus with these Jews. And these Orthodox Jews were like, it's all well and good that you are loving and kind and, you're trying to keep the Torah in that way. But why don't you keep Shabbat? That's just, you got to be wrong. You're supposed to be keeping Shabbat. Well, it's spiritual now. We don't actually, we do keep Shabbat, but not like that. We don't literally keep Shabbat. You see what I'm saying? These Jews were stumbling over the Christians repeatedly because they were like, but you don't keep the commands. You can't be right. We cannot accept your gospel because you violate the commands of our God. Your Messiah cannot be the Messiah because he, according to you, advocates you don't have to keep Shabbat. You can eat whatever you want. You can worship on whatever day you want. You don't literally need to keep the commandments. You can just spiritualize them and just be kind. A Jew is going to say, I know for a fact that your Messiah is not my Messiah because my Messiah would not say that. He would not advocate that you violate the commands of God. Therefore, I know he is not my Messiah. Do you see the connection with Mephibosheth and Ziba now? And this messianic figure of King David, who there's lies being told and people being tricked. But Messiah, in a prophetic kind of sense, says to them, stop arguing amongst themselves. I'm separating the land between the both of you equally. Shut up about it. Isn't that an interesting thing? That was an interesting thing that I just came up with as I was researching this stuff for Pesach. There's the whole other issue, and I'm wrapping up now. I apologize. It's like super late in the East Valley. But not the East Valley, on the East Coast. It's not super late in the East Valley. I apologize. Yeah, it's like 12 o'clock in the East Valley. No. But complex stuff. Also consider leaven as, I have a slide here. I'm not going to share it with you, but look at Matthew 13:33. The kingdom of heaven is like leaven. Matthew 16 and 11, where it's talking about the leaven of the Pharisees, and they're like, what do you mean bread? No, I'm not talking about bread. I'm talking about the teaching of the Pharisees. In Luke 12 and 1, the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. Paul makes several statements in Corinthians regarding, they were kind of feeling froggy about this person who had his father's wife. Like, well, you're puffed up and proud. You ought to be mourning. Don't you realize that a little leaven leavens the whole lump? So that you could say you are prideful. Leaven could be equated with pride. I think what you want to recognize overall is that leaven, most people will say that leaven represents evil or wickedness or whatever. That's just not totally true. Leaven is seen as something that infects and expands. It's just like it does with, when you're making bread, you put a little bit of it into a whole batch of dough and it spreads and grows. That's the important thing that you want to remember, is that it spreads and grows. The kingdom of heaven spreads and grows. But so does false teaching that is a twisting of our Father's word. It spreads and grows. Evil spreads and grows. Anything that spreads and grows is leaven. So there's a lot of spiritual metaphors and ideas that can be pulled out of the New Testament. And I encourage you to do that in these coming weeks as we kind of approach Passover, because I think it is important to get the leaven out in this context. We're talking about getting the leaven out. And so if you want to spiritualize that, then yes, take the negative aspects of what leaven might represent in the New Testament and say, we need to get that out of the house. If you want to spiritualize the house and you want to say, my body is a temple, this is the place where Yah has put his name, yes, get the leaven out of your house. Whatever the leaven is that you're dealing with. I hope, and it always, do you ever have the sense of kind of weight that you're kind of fighting, that you've got a weight on you? Did you ever get a guilty conscience as Passover is approaching? Like you're looking at yourself and you're thinking, leaven, if I think about it for just a minute, I realize, yeah, of course, it's leaven. I've got leaven in my house. What is the leaven that I'm dealing with? Oh, it might be evil speech. It might be lust. It might be, gosh, a whole bunch of stuff each of us might be dealing with. So do pay attention to that. Try to get that leaven out of your house. I think that for the last month, Halissa Alewine has been talking about fascinating things regarding the run-up, leading to Passover. You should check that stuff out. There's some amazing discussions that she's been having lately on her Zoom calls. So, questions, comments, concerns. I'm wrapping this up. We have gone late. I appreciate your patience and your time. Cynthia, you will have an opportunity to do that immediately after the teaching. Thank you for your patience, everyone. Next time we see you guys online, it will be probably after the Passover. We will be getting together for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. But other than that, I hope that you online will have an amazing Passover. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, reach out to us. Let us pray.